Hi, I'm Beverly Miller. I'm going to talk to you today about corrective feedback. The first article that I read was by Danielle Gagnette, and it was on general corrective feedback and to see in which classroom this would have an impact on corrective feedback. The four different classrooms were the French immersion with children in Canada, 4 French immersion classrooms for a total of 104 4th and 5th graders. And the second one was English as a second language with adults in Canada, and was one class of 25 students, mainly from Haiti, aged 17 to 15 years old. And the third one was intensive ESL with young adults in New Zealand. There were 2 classes of 12 students in each class, young adults 18 to 21 years old. The fourth class was English as a foreign language, EFL, with older adults in Korea. And this was 2 classes of 4 to 6 adult learners ranging from ages 29 to 36. So this article was in the TESOL Canada Journal, 2012, and there was another one that I read as well, and that was from Young Hee Cheen, and it appeared in a language teaching research in 2004. And the Sheen article was the one that talked about the 4 different classrooms and how corrective feedback and learner uptake in communicative classrooms, and asked to what extent do different communicative classroom settings manifest similar practices in corrective feedback, and what are the learner responses. So in each one of these classroom settings, the following were examined: the teacher feedback moves, the learner uptake, and the subsequent learner repair. Previous studies indicate that teachers' error correction occurs frequently, irrespective of pedagogical focus and classroom setting. These studies, however, also suggest that teachers' provision of corrective feedback is often arbitrary, idiosyncratic, ambiguous, and unsystematic. Specific research questions that this article by Dr. Sheen we're looking at were: how does corrective feedback vary across instructional settings? How do learner uptake and repair vary across instructional settings? To what extent does the relationship between the types of feedback and learner uptake repair vary across instructional settings? The teacher's use of corrective feedback, all the teachers' use of corrective feedback could be classified in different ways: explicit correction, providing learner with the correct form; recasts, reforming the whole or part of the learner's utterance; clarification requests, feedback that signals the learner that utterance was not understood; metalinguistic feedback, providing technical information such as influential as an adjective without providing the correct answer; elicitation, either eliciting completion, giving elicitative questions such as what's the word, or reformulation requests; or repetition, repeating learners' ill-formed utterances, or a combination of all of these. The teachers were either native English speakers or bilingual French-English speakers, with most of them having at least 5 years of experience and one teacher with 2 years of experience. Results were divided into 4 different categories: distribution of corrective feedback types, the rate of learner uptake, which is the student's utterance immediately following the teacher's feedback, and learner repair, and also the relationship between feedback types and learner uptake and repair. Of all the feedback types, recasts were the most frequent, accounting for more than 50% of the instances in all 4 settings, with the teachers in Canada Immersion and ESL utilizing recasts at a lower rate than New Zealand ESL and Korea EFL. The rates of student uptake and repair are substantially lower in both Canada Immersion and Canada ESL than in New Zealand ESL and Korea ESL, with the lowest rates being the Canada ESL classrooms. Recasts in general lead to the lowest rate of uptake, and the highest level of uptake were the metalinguistic feedback, clarification requests, and repetition. Clarification requests in all settings were more effective than recasts in eliciting uptake, but not in eliciting repair. Overall, the rate of repair following recasts was greatest in Korea EFL and lowest in Canada ESL. In response to the first research question about the extent to which corrective feedback differs in the 4 classroom settings, it was noted that the different feedback types varied in frequency, but not in type across the 4 settings. The teachers in all settings used corrective feedback to draw learners' attention to form, while the focus was still on meaning. The New Zealand ESL and the Korea EFL teachers rarely use feedback types other than recasts in response to learner errors. One of the Korea EFL teachers commented, "There are limits to the number of things that students can focus on, and there is also a limit to how much time we can distract from the flow of conversation, assuming teachers are attempting a truly communicative activity." In this EFL classroom, there was an emphasis on fluency over accuracy, and providing corrective feedback through recasts allowed the teachers to maintain the flow of communication. For the second research question on learner uptake and repair across instructional settings, there were striking differences observed. Both uptake and repair were much more prevalent in the ESL and EFL settings involving educated adults than in the immersion setting with children and in the ESL setting with less educated learners. The sharpest contrast in rate of uptake was between Canada ESL and Korea EFL. Although Canada ESL was similar in some respects, the learner's educational background as well as English proficiency was very different from Korea EFL. Learners' proficiency may influence their ability to perceive teachers' feedback or locate the errors being addressed. In the Korea EFL and New Zealand ESL classes, the learners had years of formal education, so it appears that these learners were more likely to attend to the teacher's feedback and thereby notice the gap between their erroneous input and the teacher's correct form. The third research question was on the various feedback types, learner uptake and repair across instructional settings. Given the dominance of recasts in all 4 settings, the analysis will be on the feedback strategy. Uptake and repair following recasts were more prevalent in Korea EFL and New Zealand ESL, and the recasts were characterized by simplicity, reduced partial reformulation, rising intonation or emphasis, and opportunity for uptake. Analysis concluded that recasts, which were often very explicit, were most effective when they are focused on form of a single linguistic feature and where learners are made aware of their error by hearing the recasts. This seemed to happen more in the Korea EFL and the New Zealand ESL, either due to context variables such as pedagogical focus, age, proficiency, and educational background, but it may have also been due to class size. In conclusion, the study confirmed that teachers seem to prefer recasts and that recasts are the most dominant type of feedback. This study cast doubt on the claim made by some researchers that recasts are a less effective feedback type in promoting learner uptake and immediate repair. In fact, it may be that recasts provide greater opportunities for language acquisition in contexts where both teachers and students are oriented to attending to linguistic form as opposed to focusing exclusively on meaning. And the most recent article I looked at in 2012 also seems to suggest that teachers' feedback practices that include direct corrections is by far the preferred correction strategy. The author devised a project to prepare ESL trainees for the challenge that lie ahead by providing them with an opportunity to experience the highs and lows of giving corrective feedback and to develop their practices in that regard. The teacher trainees were enrolled in their 5th semester of a 4-year TSL program. They had already completed several teaching methodology courses, but the topic of corrective feedback was not dealt with systematically in the training teacher program. The high school learners were in Secondary 3, grade 9 in the English system, and had already received approximately 400 hours of English instruction, focusing mostly on the development of oral skills. Each trainee was paired with 2 or 3 learners with whom they corresponded by email for the entire semester. The teacher trainees interacted with high school students to provide corrective feedback on learners' grammatical and lexical errors in texts written in their second language, English, for the duration of a school semester. They identified some hurdles that they experienced, like adapting and catering to individual needs, diagnosing errors, fear of discouraging the learners, and maintaining motivation. The teacher trainees kept a journal documenting their reflections and questions about corrective feedback, and 1 month after the project ended, the trainees were interviewed individually to discuss the challenges of corrective feedback and some survival tips on overcoming these challenges. Survival tip number 1, do not adopt a one-size-fits-all behavior. There are many ways to have learners correct their errors, but in terms of direct or indirect corrective feedback, the teacher needs to consider the type of error committed by the learner. For linguistic notions the learners have been exposed to or expected to know, it makes sense to provide indirect corrections with or without brief explanation or simple reminders. In contrast, if the linguistic errors that the learners have not been exposed to or have not been the subject of instruction, direct corrections can be used or errors can simply be ignored. Direct corrections can be the strategy of choice when teachers are unsure because they are easier, less time-consuming, and more productive. Survival tip number 2, be selective about what you correct. Teachers can overcome their fear of discouraging learners by providing focused feedback. Teachers should adapt their correction focus to the context, type of text, genre, audience, purpose, and notify the learners what to expect. Teachers might simply flag the errors in the first and last paragraphs of an essay and have students self-correct the rest of the text, or assign short writing assignments that utilize only certain linguistic features and limit feedback on those features. Then, as learners progress in their mastery of the language, teachers can individualize their feedback or increase the number of linguistic features they focus on. Survival tip number 3, do not correct everything the learners write. Writing itself can improve writing, even without the intervention of the teacher. Writing short text frequently is better than writing long text less often. Students should be encouraged to keep a journal where they note their reflections on their learning and their opinions or personal responses to what they read or hear in class, and these do not need to be corrected for form. Survival tip number 4, train learners to self-edit. For learners to truly benefit from corrective feedback, they must be held accountable for revising or rewriting their texts. Self-editing is a skill that must be taught and practiced. Students can take an active part in their learning process by creating their own correction key based on errors flagged by the teacher on their written texts. This correction key can then serve as a self-editing checklist for pieces of writing and also help the teachers customize their feedback. Student writing should be inserted into a portfolio or a writing binder for the students so it will not be discarded in the recycling bin after class. Survival tip number 5, put things into perspective. Becoming fluent in a second language is a process that takes time. Before grading a stack of compositions and feeling fearful of seeing the same mistakes repeated, teachers should realize that mistakes are not only acceptable but are helpful as they provide teachers with information for planning future instruction and remedial activities. Even though teachers take a lot of time and effort to provide feedback, learners will continue to make errors and some will progress more slowly than others. Rather than become frustrated, teachers should rejoice when they notice progress, however small, and see their efforts and those of their students rewarded. The tutors concluded by feeling that the provision of corrective feedback may be the most important activity on which teachers explicitly focus on form. They saw correct feedback as an interactional strategy par excellence, a privileged moment at which each learner can benefit from the teacher's full attention. It's not so much to correct or not to correct, or even how, when, and what to correct, but rather finding the most helpful, realistic, and productive way to show students you care about through the feedback you provide. The last part really resonated with me in that I think all of teaching should be about showing the student we as teachers care. It's sometimes hard to find the least offensive way to help a struggling student. But even in our most direct and explicit techniques, we as teachers are showing our students we care. I agree that corrective feedback in recasts can be helpful, and in the flow of communication can be a sign that we care and not a need to show off our expertise or make the student feel degraded. It seems like a natural part of learning a language and something that mothers do with their young toddlers without giving a thought to whether they are giving their children the wrong message or discouraging their language learning. Mothers are often excited and energized by the process of their toddler learning how to communicate, and that's a good attitude for teachers to remember as well. Corrective feedback can be a positive experience for the student even when using recasts in an explicit manner if we remember that we as teachers are there to assist and guide the students in a knowledgeable yet loving way. The only questions I would pose are, how can we as ESL teachers change the current perception of the teacher's corrective feedback, particularly when it comes to asking students to spend time editing or rewriting an assignment. I appreciate Ganette's comments about how editing can be learner initiated, but at the high school and college level, I have found students to complete edits quickly as meaningless activity, and perhaps do not realize till they are adults that editing is not only necessary but a natural part of developing a piece of writing. Some of the research on corrective feedback seems to corroborate this idea that age and experience are key factors in how students perceive corrective feedback. So is it even possible to change students' perceptions of corrective feedback, particularly editing, in high school? This was some of the research I did on corrective feedback. I hope you found my comments and my questions helpful as you continue to teach and provide corrective feedback.